Welcome to London's Call in 2017. I want to first of all, before I forget, pay huge thanks to the 5 people who organised this event. This isn't just one day for them. They spend most of the year preparing for this. So huge kudos to them, and I'm looking forward already to next year's event, if this is recording or listening. So my name is Barry Hughes. I tweeted at Devon the Cloud. I have a blog that's not up there, devonthecloud.wordpress.com. In fact, if you want to go to that website, I have a lot of the slide deck for this is already up there, and a video I recorded on something I'm going to briefly show you today, but you need to see more of it really. So I want to talk this morning, by the way, about thinking in components, and I'll explain why this is a topic that I got interested in. So a bit about me and the company who are still paying me today, even though I'm here, is Blue Wave Technology. We are based in northern UK and in Ireland. We basically are a Salesforce partner. We're also an IBM partner of long standing. We have about 35 employees now. We also do bits and pieces on DocuSign and Pardot. From my own point of view, I'm one of the 9 people in Blue Wave who are actually certified Salesforce instructors. I have lots of other credentials as well. I'm very proud to say that this month we're celebrating 4 years of running the Dublin Developer Group, and if you're not in a developer group, I assume most people are here, please join your local developer group and get involved. The organisers appreciate it. So, this time last year, I spoke at London's Calling, and it was really showing off an app that I was building. And I built the app sort of on a dare from Simon Goodyear. It was an app to replace something I'd built for the previous Dreamforce. It was a project timesheet app. This is Visualforce, and I recreated Lightning components. But I made it back in January of last year. And around about February last year, when London's Calling was happening last year, Lightning was at kind of a crossroads, kind of hitting a point whereby instead of demoing it, you actually start thinking about building production apps with Lightning. In January to March of last year, I was preparing to teach the new Lightning components course that Salesforce University give. At this point last year, it had never been taught. Now it is being taught all the time. I taught it for the first time in April last year. It was the first time it was taught in EMEA. The first time it was ever taught anywhere in the world was March last year. But a lot of the concepts we go through to make this kind of app, we went through. But for me, this was just a proof of concept. It was just getting ready for things. I'd never intended for this to go live because it isn't really replacing anything. But it was just for me to get used to it. And it took a lot of code to do this back then. Things have improved. So back in January last year, February last year, this is the kind of things we were teaching. The only place we could surface a component really was in Salesforce 1. Things have moved on. But all of these different patterns that we taught, we teach these in the class. How to handle events, how to handle inheritance, how to use v.body. These are the things that we teach in that class. So it's very much a class to, even back then, was very useful to be on. But there have been a lot of improvements. SLDS is now baked into the platform. We used to have to bring that in as a static resource. Lightning Experience Record home pages, we're still going to have the utility bar. These are places we can now put our components, which we could never do back then last year. We have our base components, just come out in winter 17, and they are improving, including hidden fixes happening all the time. But all in all, what's happening is that isn't just that the platform is getting better, we have less code to write. We have about 42 exercises we do in that 5-day course. We have about 30% less code now than we had to do this time last year to make the same apps. So things are improving, and we can make better apps for our customers. But this talk was more about, when I taught that course, the questions I was asking the attendees that was causing them a bit of problem. That course is very workshop-based. Trailhead, when you do Lightning components, is very workshop-based in that you're given step-by-step instructions what to do. And you make an app, and it works, and that's great. But when you have to think, how do I make something for a customer? How do I think? How do I start? What are the things I have to go through to get from an empty screen to an app actually working? And this is where people thinking about that was the issue, and this is what I want to talk about this morning. And I'm going to talk about it in 2 steps. I taught the course 3 times up until early June last year, and then I've only taught it once since, and the reason for that is because our company Blue Wave have actually signed up a few big customers, and I've been developing Lightning components pretty much every day since the 1st of June last year. Since then, constantly Lightning components. So in that time, the framework has changed, but also my thinking about how I deliver things has changed. And this is what I want to bring you through. Some tools that we use, that I'm using in Blue Wave, and also then how we think about developing our components. So there's two steps to this. One is how we make the user interface. 99% of the components you will make will have some element of user interface. There are exceptions to that, but just like making a visual force page, making Lightning components is all about the user wants to see something. They want to do something. And then when we have that accepted from the user, actually designing our components. So there is two steps to this, and this is what we have found. And I'm going to augment this then by adding some use cases to the end of this. So the first step is user interface design. And in Dreamforce this year, I was introduced to something. I'm not sure if anyone else has ever heard of this. Anyone heard of this design starter kit? Who's never heard of it? Actually, I've never heard of it. Okay. So I skipped 2 sessions. I don't know if Thomas Watt is here. I missed his session at Dreamforce because I went to this instead. And I've watched the video of Thomas's session. I'm okay, but I got a lot about. I use this every day. This is a kit that was made by the Salesforce UX team themselves. This is not my kit. They made this, okay? And what it is you can download it. It runs off NPM. You don't even have to be inside a Salesforce org to use it. You add in some markup, and it'll show you the markup screens. So instead of me using balsamic mockups like I used to do on the right-hand side, I'm now making screens like this without even being in Salesforce. I'm making screens, and I put them up on Heroku. Customers have usernames and passwords. They can look at all the demos. I can flick between page to page. And I'm actually making this just as HTML, which means if they change their mind on something, all I'm doing is changing some HTML. I'm not changing events. I'm not changing components. I don't have to work on a component from the very start, which on our first project back in June we did. But since I've got this tool, it's really good. So the links that I have here, I'm going to show you these 2 pages in a second. But this slide deck, as I said at the very start, is up on my blog right now, devinthecloud.wordpress.com. You can get the whole slide deck is already there. And this is the link to their GitHub account. So let's show you what this looks like and how I use it. Okay. So let's show you the websites first. So I have made this screen here as a prototype. This is just HTML. The workshop that they ask you to go through in Dreamforce for the starter kit, the link I have put on the blog post, it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you're following instructions. You make sure to install the latest version of Node. You fork a GitHub repo, which they have made, Salesforce UX team have made. And effectively, it contains things like gulp and NPM. The idea is that you basically fork it down. You make your own fork of it, clone it down. You run NPM installing it, which does take a bit of time because there's a lot in it. And then simply run npm dev. So that's what I'm going to do. Just run npm dev, and you can see what happens. So if I go to my terminal, it's going to run npm dev, which I have ready here. And I hit return, and it's going to run the job. And this will keep listening, obviously, to changes, and it will launch up the starter page. Okay, so this is their initial starter page. So the workshop, what it does then is ask you to go through and follow a simple file. And this you can pretty much do on your own. There isn't much to this. So they give you a workshop file that's pretty much empty. And what they do is they say, OK, here is a page header. Add in some HTML. And as you actually keep adding in HTML into your page, it'll start making a screen. And on my blog post, I've actually recorded a 25-minute webinar that brings you through this a bit more in detail because I don't have enough time here to go through it all. But it's pretty straightforward. And most people at Dreamforce, and even people I've shown this to in the Dublin Developer Group, picked this up within 20 minutes and started using it and saw immediately the value of it. So what I've done is I've created my own page. So this is a page I've created. This is the screen I showed you a few seconds ago. I can add in JavaScript as I want to, and I have all the HTML markup I've created. So this page, just to remind you, what I've made is basically this. Okay, this is all just one page, and it's pretty rich. This is what this customer would like. They want a search bar on the left. They want to see products on the right. They have lots of information, so we've made a card-based display rather than a row display. But generally speaking, this is just typical web development. So if I take you back to the code, sorry. So this is the Atom code. It's pretty straightforward. There isn't much to it. You just have to learn SLDS. So if you're not familiar with SLDS, you just have to learn the classes. But all of this code I pretty much copied from Lightning Design System and just made it work to what I wanted it to be. Pretty straightforward. Then when you have that, what's the big advantage of this is that when you then say to the client, OK, you're happy with that screen. What do you want to do next? You're happy enough with it. You already have the markup done. You just copy the markup into Salesforce as a component and then start breaking it down, which is really handy. So if I go to my browser, or sorry, to my, this is the component I created. I made the same component. It's pretty much the exact same stuff. Okay, it's all the same, pretty much the same markup, just copy down. There's a few things you have to do when you copy it across. The first one is, and Skip Sahls was talking to him last night about this, right now components don't support SVG, so we have to replace these with lightning icons and lightning buttons. The SVG comes across in Lightning Design System. That's fine. The other thing that we can also do, and this is where the design system is really handy, is that we can also get data. So in what they use a library called Nunjux as part of this kit. And Nunjux allows you to get data from JSON. So for example, this is what the code looks like in the regular HTML page. I've actually changed it to be an OR iteration. If I just flash back to show you what that looks like in the code I had before, when I made my code here, I actually just iterated over. This looks a lot like Angular. This is Nunjux. And I'm looping over. And the rule is that if my HTML file is called prices viewer, as long as I have a prices viewer JSON file in my back data directory, this is the data that comes across. So I can loop over products. I can get a handle on any values I want to. And you might notice that things like underscore C's and underscore are there. The reason is I'm already thinking ahead of what my data model might be. So when I copy it across to Salesforce, I know what the field names are going to be, and my code will almost be there for me. Okay. So if I look here, I basically have an OR iteration over something called v.products, which I haven't defined yet. I'll come back to that in a second. But you can see I'm looking over product.name. I'm looking over product.market underscore C. This is the name of what I had in my mockup. So I know I'm going to make a field called market, and I'm going to bring that record in. Then to get the mockup just working without doing too much work, I have v.products. And v.products is an attribute. Attributes, as you probably know, are variables in Lightning component development. And this attribute I have at the very top, where I have it as a list of objects. And what I've done to populate it is I have initialization code that's calling some JavaScript code. And the JavaScript code is taking the exact same JSON from my starter kit and simply taking it and throwing it into my v.products. And all of a sudden I have my component working. Now I'm not calling Apex yet, but I have it working. Okay? And I can see it in Salesforce and start breaking it down. The next step of this slide deck is to talk about how I break it down. I then move on to change that to look and bring in some Apex code, which most who've done Lightning code development already do, which is very straightforward. But the final thing that I've done is I'm kind of breaking this up a bit more. So if we look at the code behind the Apex version, I am taking out, for example, the big row and putting it into its own separate component. That separate component is basically being populated through a SOQL query. But I have to get all the fields. Okay, that's the bit of the interesting thing. And once I've done that, I can simply use this with the record attribute and display it. Now, the way I use record and how I'm breaking this up is important, because later on we're going to see something else. It's not live until summer 17 as far as I know. The guys can correct me if I'm wrong. And that, of course, is data service. Data service is coming out and going to change what we do. So this is the exact same code pretty much, but there is a slight change in that in my card, instead of passing the ID, I'm actually using my record preview. And then I don't have to do the query. The query is actually a lot smaller. It's just getting the IDs. But the same code will work. So you can see step by step from making an interface to getting into the component to then getting the data. I'm actually working with the customer. So even before I wrote any Salesforce code, the customer knew what they were going to get. And I could hand it off to another developer saying make it, or I could make it myself. Okay, and it can be an iterative process. End of quick demo. All right. So the webinar I recorded about a week ago. It was an internal Blue Wave webinar, but I've put up on YouTube anyway. And that is the Nunjux library. Mozilla make this library called Nunjux. That's what they use in the starter kit. But one question I had, and it was an assumption I had at the time, was, are they going to keep updating this? Because they launched it at Dreamforce. It was 3 people showing it they looked 12 to me. They were so young. And they were designing people, and they were really good. But I had a question. Utility bars coming out. I don't see that yet. The answer is they are going to update it. Okay, it's going to happen, I think, in a week or two's time. But they came back to me with it after the question, literally a few minutes later, and told me it is getting updated. So it's certainly something to keep in mind, and it will definitely help you in development. So let's split then from UI to talk about component design. So component design for me is based on a few different concepts. There's a lot of work already done in other languages like React that show you how to make components the way they think to make components. But I think Salesforce component is slightly different. Yes, you should try to make a component as small as possible, doing as little functionality as possible. That does make them easier to test, and you can have them as building blocks. But there are other reasons to think about components. One of them is more structural. There was a webinar in November from Salesforce themselves on advanced Lightning component development, and they talked about this kind of structuring idea, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. But simplifying your code and spreading out your code into components does make that you can spread out your work, you can share your work among developers. It also makes your testing more efficient, because then technically if you've tested a component and it works, you don't have to go and retest it again. Reusability is the primary reason to make a component, but I would argue against taking every part of a screen, even down to field level, and making a component. It takes time. There's events to make. It can make things slower. So in my opinion, as opposed to things like React, you only make a component if there's a cost benefit to the customer. That's what we have found. There's no point in trying to make everything really down to a smaller level unless you're going to reuse it again. So we have found not to go all the way down to actually make your components so that they do something, but if you only make them reusable if there's a reason for doing so. Again, it just takes time and cost to make the events, and events are one part of the reason things are a bit slower. But also reusability is where can I use my component, where can I show it? That's another reason to make it reusable. So let's look at some examples of this. So this is a structure I showed you a few minutes ago. We've made a couple of structures like this very similar, where we've taken a screen and we decided, okay, we're going to split this up a bit. The top bar, if anyone used the app builder, it makes this already for you automatically, so we don't bother making this guy. Okay, so the idea is that we're going to make these as separate components and make the overall app with app builder. The left-hand side is going to be a search bar of some kind. Now, we have made this so that when you access the overall app, we're passing in some variables as in the design part of the component that say what our context is. So this then works across, for one customer, 8 different types of context. In other words, I'm looking for a list of products or a list of opportunities or a list of accounts, a list of contacts, that kind of thing. But we can search for these records and see the records on the right-hand side. This was really because they wanted a custom field. They wanted to control how their users searched. But then we also have our search engine, and the idea is that when we click on search, we generate a SOCL string with all the values we want to search for, and we use an application event to fire it across here. This guy picks up that query and does our searching. Okay? That's the kind of idea behind the structure. But this is, again, thinking of how I take that big screen and separate it out. We can also separate it out based on reusability. So we have a particular checkbox here. This checkbox, how it works is that when you click on the all, these get disabled and blanked off, so we know when to look at all. But when you tap on this off and check these, obviously it works like a regular checkbox. The idea is that when you've selected your checkbox, when you click on search, we still want to find out what this is, but we didn't want to make all this code over and over and over again. So we made a component to do this. It's 3 levels deep, and that component is now available in my GitHub repo. So there's a link and a slide deck to get there. We also had a date filter here. The card is going to be reusable. We make this change depending on its context, but effectively it's the same component. The idea is to take parts that are going to be reusable and give us an advantage when it comes to making other parts of the app, that the cost benefit of this works. But I don't go and make every single field component because that just takes too long. So these are the webinars this is John Bealow's webinar I spoke about from November, where he talks about this kind of idea of structuring your components. And thinking in React. React is something I've read up on quite a bit, and how React make components is very similar to how I think components should work inside of Salesforce. Another reason to make a component is to simplify your code. And this can happen a lot of ways. This is one example that we've actually written recently, where we're comparing cost and values of products from one date to another. So this is looking at a product in 2007 as compared to what it cost in 2005. The problem is that these costs aren't just one value. We are getting one value from our record, just the retail price. But we have to calculate what the taxes, the discounts are, and also compare it to the previous value, and also calculate all of these out. So when you start doing your comparison, this calculation gets a bit mad. In fact, very mad. Okay? This is just one value as opposed to the other, and I've got to write huge amounts of code to compare one against the other. Now, you could use JavaScript for this, but to make life easier, what we did was to make a component to do it. So again, we're using a single component called rates viewer comparison cell, And this is just part of the code that we write to compare one rate to the other. Again, simplifying your code so you're not just trying to decipher out what's going on. Plus, if you do make an error, you don't want to fix it in 20 places, you're just fixing it in one. So for example, one problem we had with this was that we might get in not a number. We might get in a blank or a 0. So the only way you can actually check for that in components at the minute is in JavaScript. You use the nan. So what we do in this component is we check everything for nans and or ifs and everything just in case we get an error. But if we had to do that everywhere that we're doing a calculation without componentizing it, it would have been nightmare code. Okay. So again, sometimes you'll see complex code that can be easy just to pull out into its own separate component. Okay, and that checkbox group, as I said, this is what I talked about before, where you can check a checkbox, or if you check the all button, everything gets disabled, as you see here. So we built this for our customer, and that code is now available on github.com, Barry Hughes 1. You can grab it there and see what it's 3 levels deep, but it does work pretty well. Okay, so this is another example of an app. This is the very first Lightning component app we built in Blue Wave. We built it last June when things were a bit more difficult. And this is the exact app we created without having our starter kit. And the problem with doing this was we had 2 screens. This was a lead management console. Their main problem for this client was that leads belong to specific people, but the access to lead was public read. So they wanted to target the leads that people were interested in, so we had to write some code to make sure that, for example, Barry Hughes has access to specific leads and he can work on those today. So we made an app to show those, and then we made a separate convert button, because the problem back in June was that the lead conversion in Lightning Experience wasn't up to what it was in Classic. Plus, this company had a particular way of converting their leads. So we built a component, and you can see this is the initial screen where we can change priorities by just flicking the switch and it saves it automatically. We're also calculating some importance to do with the lead. Is it already matching some people we already have, that kind of thing. It is also paginated, which we also have to code. And when you press convert, we have another screen where we have a lot of stages. So we were allowing them to not just select a parent account and an account, which is how they worked, but also to create one. So they could search for an account or create an account. Then the next step would be to go and search and create for a contact. The next step would be an opportunity. So you can see their process was long. And the problem with it being long was they might not have all the information yet, but they do want to do some of it. So what we did was when you got as far as, let's say, account, and you pressed on go to the next stage, we actually saved all these fields in a custom object. And we only converted it when we got to the end. That was the idea. You can imagine there's a lot going on here. And the problem without having the starter kit was that I couldn't, this was done in a balsamic wireframe, and things changed. But I couldn't explain to the customer what I was doing because we spent a long time even doing this wizard. There's a long time spent doing components, and they can't really see it. The first time they actually saw it was a week before UAT. So this is where the starter kit has helped us out, because now we can show this screen as a mock-up saying, this is what we're going to make, and then come back and make it afterwards. Okay? But we learned a lot doing this app. But one reason to look at this particular app was that this conversion wizard, which kind of is from here down, this takes in the ID of the record, which means that we could also put it as a tab on our lead object. So instead of going to the console, if they're in any lead, they can see where the conversion is and convert in the same place. So this is something you could never do with Visualforce, where you can take a big app and a part of it and then move it then to another place completely. Okay. So finally, we're doing all right for time. I want to talk about a scenario that I've brought up at 2 of my classes that stumped people a little bit. Stumped me for a while too, but we eventually got it working. And that is how we process records, and in particular, one particular option, save all. So we have a table here of adding records. So in my case, I've got trainers, and I'm adding a new date when they're available. And I click on Add, and that'll create some record within Salesforce. This Add button, having this regular in Visualforce is pretty straightforward. What you do is you have your Apex repeat, you have queried for your records in your controller, you're able to update the records on your Visualforce page, which updates the controller, and you press Save. So in Visualforce, this is not too bad. But in component, thinking about things in components, you don't really want in a component to try to identify what a button is. So each of these in turn is a component. So we made a component for each row. So when you press on add, it's simple. You just press add and it just saves the record in the context. You don't have to worry about getting the right record. It just saves it. The problem is that because these are all separate components now, if I do a save all on the outside, how does this work? I don't really want to press save all and have each add button firing, because when I press save all, I want it to refresh when it's done. How do I know when it's done? And the other thing is that some of these might not be filled in. So how do I know when someone's been left there? How do I handle errors? So if an error comes back, how do I tell it which one the error belongs to, right? So this is all an issue, and we were trying to figure out the best way to do this. So I'm going to show it to you two different ways. So the first way is to consider the issue here. So the issue is that each row is going to be a component of itself. We want the parent to not to worry about identifying a row, just simply call out, just do something and get back a response. So we're going to put the button in the parent, and this, I've diagrammed this out a few different ways so you can see it. This is the parent component here, and these are each individual row. So this save all button is effectively what it's going to do is it's going to tell each row to save and tell me you've saved. That's the idea behind it. But it kind of morphed into something a bit different. What we're going to do to solve this is we're going to make an attribute on the parent beside the save all, pretty much in the same component as the save all. And this object is going to be initially blank. It looks like this. Sorry. It looks like this. So we have an attribute just of type object. Now when you have an attribute of type object, effectively you can just throw JSON into it and it just picks it up, which is fine. And that's what we did. So when we press save all, we're going to write some code. Now when we press save all, we'll know the IDs of the products we're trying to save because we've displayed them in the first place. So we have the ID of each product. So what we do is we're going to make a JSON object for each one. We're going to add the ID into some identifier. I called it record ID. And I'm going to put in a message. That initial message is, I called it waiting, but just a default value. Initially, we're going to have no values in it, but we're going to populate those. And what we do is we fire an event, an application event. This is the controversial bit. In theory, if you know how to use an ORA method, we should be using an ORA method here because this is the parent and this is the child. There's a problem, though. We want to decouple the save all button from being in the parent. This could be effectively anywhere. We could have it in the sidebar anywhere, and it wouldn't necessarily be in the same structure. So the OR method wouldn't work. The other problem we had was that in some cases, we're generating these rows using $a create component. If you use $a create component, OR methods don't work. So we're using an application event for this, just in case you're wondering why. So we're going to take that object we've created, one object for each record, and we're going to send it off as an application event. And each record retrieves that object, and it's going, okay, what do you want me to do? Right, my ID is there. You want me to save. Okay, so will I save? Well, you'll pick it up with some JavaScript, and you'll say, okay, I don't have a price filled in. I don't have a date filled in, so I won't save. So I send back a message to the parent saying, don't save me. But if I do fill a date in, and it is a properly formatted date, the JavaScript will return back in the value as part of it. Yes, save me, and this is the value I want to save. Product ID X, and the date field is the 1st of January 2017. And when I get it back in the component event, in the parent is basically got this component event waiting for these results, and as soon as I get 10 messages back, I then fire some JavaScript to say, okay, keep looping over. I got 10 results. As soon as I got my 10th result, I know what I'm doing, and I send off using Apex to make the save. So the save all button is actually doing the save, not the individual records. And in that case, we get back the error messages beside the save all. Okay? Now this has some issues. It does work. A few issues. The number one issue is we have to write Apex in the first place. Apex is fine, but really we shouldn't have to write Apex to do simple saves and simple queries. It costs money, you have to test it. And, yeah. They also ignore field level security. So if we go and query for a field, any user can see those fields. And Andres Perez El Toro has got a great blog post about that. We have to get all the fields. So if anyone changes their mind and want to add a field to our overall structure, we have to change the Apex as well. We had a problem with error reading. So when I do my error handle here, how do I tell it which one had the problem? That's an issue. And the code, basically code is just very repetitive for this as well. So as of summer 17, we have a new way of doing this with data service. Okay? So data service is not yet, and Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it's not out there yet. I think it's still developer preview. But effectively how data service works is that you have a tag, component, force, colon, in this case record preview, but I believe the preview bit will be removed eventually. The idea behind this is that we can do actions on this, and we've got some attributes to help us out here. So the record ID is the ID of the record we're actually working with. The record is the object we're working with. Okay? And the record error is really handy. Whenever we get back an error from anything we do with that object, it'll populate in the record error. So immediately we can get back the errors and things we want to. Plus, we can react to when something happens. So when the record has been updated or created, we can pick that up and run some JavaScript from that. The JavaScript is pretty simple. In fact, if you've done remote objects in Visualforce, it's similar in many ways. We simply get a handle to the record handler, which is here, or record handler, which is, I've got the thing wrong, it's there. And then that save record, you get the callback, and it'll save all, but this is just JavaScript. There is no Apex here. It just saves it for you. Any errors come straight back to us. So how does that help us in our routine? Well, actually just talk about data service for a minute. It does specific things, but there are things it does not do. So it does CRUD operations. That's good. And it gives it back errors. It's also very good. But there are limitations. We only have those CRUD operations. There is no querying yet, and that's a problem. Because for my solution, I'll show you in a minute, I still have to get the IDs of the products I want to update. So I have to use Apex anyway. Okay, still you have to do that. Child records, if you do a query and you want to split it out into child records, you have to get the IDs of those as well. It doesn't get them automatically. And currently, it doesn't work with communities yet or Lightning Out currently. But again, this, I can see the potential with Lightning Data Service. When these things are here, which hopefully will soon, this will become, all your Apex stuff will get moved away. So let's talk about my solution with data service and how it changes. Well, when I click Save All, I'm going to do the same application event, picking up the same command that people want to use, but instead of firing JS to say, OK, save me, I'll fire JS to simply save my record preview. Remember, this is a single product, single record. So I'll save this record preview. That'll do the saving, and any errors will simply come back straight there, and I'll just stop. But if everything gets saved, I'll be sending my component event straight back to the parent saying, I've saved. The component, the save all button is waiting for all these messages, and then he'll fire JS to say, done, but there is no Apex here. Everything already has been saved in each individual record. And this is the difference between what we're doing right now and where data service will get us. And my advice to you is that where you see you calling Apex in your Lightning components, keep those points to a minimum. If you have a particular component that can, and Christoph Konrads has written blog posts about how to make your Lightning components functional, whereby you can have an Apex call and a component that can be used elsewhere. I would recommend you do that, because eventually you'll replace that with data service. That's the idea. Okay, so not to have all sorts of Apex calls everywhere. So in summary, and we have a few minutes for questions, which is good. Starter kit is brilliant. I was helping the guys pack bags yesterday for this event, and they all went to the pub, but I had a job to do for an hour, and I did some mocking up for a customer who needed one, and I was straight into starter kit. So it really is brilliant. I've used it so much, and it's actually allowed Blue Wave us to help us move data or move their jobs around. For example, if you've got a bigger company and you have a web developer who doesn't know anything about Salesforce, they can go off and make the screens and give it to someone who knows Apex and Lightning to actually make it. Okay, so you can separate out what you're doing. So it's a fantastic tool. Just a comment of mine that I think that there's a lot of blog posts out there and a lot of talk about design practices within Visualforce. I just don't see the same level of discussion about Lightning. Lightning talk at the minute is about how to do something rather than why you do it or practices around it. So that's Save All button. I don't see blog posts about that. But I think people will get there. I think when that starts becoming the norm, Lightning really will be something we'll all share. Also, changes in the platform will have huge ramifications. And even though they're not available yet, and typically we don't code for things that are coming, it is always good to keep these things in mind. That idea of only calling Apex in certain places so you can eventually replace with data service, that kind of thing. Now, you won't replace everything with data service because it only does CRUD operations, but you will always need Apex to get weird data with different bits and pieces or different processing capabilities, but you get the idea. And I didn't show one demo of utility bar, and utility bar is a whole new thing. We can put components in the bottom of the utility bar, and certainly we're going to use it a lot in Blue Wave. So for me, custom design in Salesforce is all about your deliverables, number one. Cost benefit, that's number one. Reusability, in my opinion, is second, but interface compatibility, in other words, where can it go? If I make my lead conversion wizard, where else can I use it? And that's the biggest question I ask when I do my designs, is where else can I use this thing? What if I have a very nice screen, which I'm making at the minute to do complicated opportunity line items, but I have a little tab to show me my current total. That could be one app, but the current total could be part of the homepage, things like that. And after that, there's some questions. And I think there's a microphone if anyone has any questions.
Hello. Yeah, so prior to, great, thanks. Really good talk. Before you did the last bit where you said, with the data service, you don't get on communities.
At the moment.
Yeah. Even before then, I'm predominantly developing communities, Lightning components on communities. So I'm kind of interested, and I've seen, like, for example, you can't use the navigate to component kind of stuff. It feels like there's quite a lot of stuff for communities where you've got a subsection of the components, and just kind of, are there any particular considerations that you should use when you're doing that?
Great, yeah. I agree. I don't work for Salesforce, so I couldn't tell you the answer to that, but I know that communities, first time I saw communities of components was actually in Winter 17, really. I don't do a lot of communities, but what I focus on more is generic code for components. The fact that some things aren't available in communities, I think will be. For example, I'm always frustrated with Salesforce 1. I want to put a component here, and it just doesn't go there. So I think that eventually you're going to get there. Record homepage is a huge change for me, but I take your point. Your communities and Lightning Out still has some limitations. Yes, it does. That's not a good answer, but.
Thank you. So we found there are performance impacts in certain scenarios with Lightning components. Things like having a component inside an iteration that has a init handler or a change handler, having or ifs inside iterations that then spawn other things. So when you're designing your components, what consideration do you give to performance, and how do you design them? Yeah,
Aura ifs are very good, but if you have an Aura if inside an Aura if, that's a bit like having an apex repeat inside an apex repeat. They're inherently not a good idea. For me, that's a way of figuring out, okay, can I make a reusable component to do something and switch it? So usually you've Aura ifs where you go on Aura if do something else. That could easily have been a component with an attribute, with a kind of a mode, yes or no, or some value. And the component reacts to it, or it could even be a different component reacting to it. So the second Aura if is the problem. The inner Aura if, that really should be a component of some kind. And that's one reason you take that out to be reusable. It also solves a lot of problems for you because you're not having that second Aura if. I find that markup limitations make things slower than the events itself. So passing events back and forward in methods is pretty quick, but some of the markup, like you talked about, can cause problems, yeah. One issue we had, for example, that we're not sure yet has been resolved is on create component, which is probably the biggest thing that we would do in terms of grunt on this platform. And if you have, if you create a component that has, a create component has got an event inside it, and you have a handler above it and a parent, when you collapse that component and recreate another one, and then another one, the Aura handlers get repeated in the DOM. And then when you fire the event, they actually get fired 3 times. The platform fires it, but if you use the spinner, it'll spin 3 times. So there are things like that lately I tried a version of what we did and it worked, whereas 3 months ago that was a problem. So there are some issues in terms of performance. I was even talking to Skip Saul yesterday and he was telling me, yeah, there are, but they are getting over them. They are improving it, and some of it is silently, not as part of releases. So I do get your pain, and that's the kind of thing that a young platform like this is going to have for a little while. Again, not a good answer, but there you go. Oh, here comes a hard question.
No worries, Barry. Thank you for that. You're talking about how we're going to move away from Apex, and you've got the whole concept of the record view there. I might still have like my old school kind of Apex hat on, but I'm always thinking that with governor limits and everything, you always do everything in batch, so to speak. So, can you do something similar to that, and would you ever want to? to say a group of records. So you know how you've got the whole idea of going to that individual component and saving just that individual one.
Yeah.
Can you and should you?
At the moment, no.
No.
But that's, I think that's why it's held over. For example, in Visualforce, remote objects, right? When you do query in remote object in Visualforce, you get 100, not 200. That's probably an issue to do with limitations. You can offset and get more and more and more, but you've got it one by one by one. I think they have a similar issue with Lightning, in that I think they want to give us our tried and trusted 200 at a time kind of thing, but they haven't got it ready yet. And they had said at Dreamforce that they were going to put data service out GA as of spring 17, but only for one record at a time. So in Blue Wave, we kind of thought, okay, then we're not using it until we get everything, because we have no idea how it's going to change. So it's when they come out with things like querying and collections and saving collections that the likes of my Save All button is going to completely change. But right now, that's what we're faced with. No, it's a good question. And it was asked at Dreamforce, and there wasn't really a timeline on it. Yeah.
Thanks. Makes sense.
Silence. Either you didn't understand me or everything went very, very well. Thanks very much for coming, guys, and enjoy the day. Thank you.